Story 1. The smell is the first thing that gets to you in a hospital. Not the disease, not the fear, but the sterile chemical scent of manufactured cleanliness. It's a smell that promises healing, but always feels like it's masking decay. I learned that firsthand 2 winters ago, and the memory of it still leaches the warmth from my bones. It started with black ice and a stupid, clumsy fall. The result was a shattered tibia and a fractured fibula, earning me a metal plate, 12 screws, and a medically mandated stay in a semi-private room on the hospital's oldest wing. My roommate was a man named Mr. Harrison. He was ancient, a wisp of a man with skin like parchment stretched thin over a delicate frame of bird bones. He never spoke, never had visitors. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, his breathing a shallow, rhythmic rattle that became the soundtrack to my sleepless nights. The first 2 nights were uneventful, a blur of pain medication and the drone of late-night television. It was on the 3rd night that the silence broke. I woke around 3 a.m., that dead hour when the world feels thin and fragile. The rhythmic rattle from the other side of the curtain was gone. The silence that replaced it was heavy, suffocating. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. My leg, encased in its heavy cast, was a dead weight, anchoring me to the bed. Then I heard it. A soft, wet, scraping sound, scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from the corner of the room, near the window where the moonlight struggled through the grimy glass. I craned my neck, my muscles screaming in protest. The curtain separating our beds was pulled back just enough for me to see. The bed opposite me was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. The scraping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and I saw him. Mr. Harrison was crouched in the corner, his back to me. His thin hospital gown hung off his skeletal frame. He was scraping at the wall with his fingernails, not frantically, but with a slow, methodical pressure. The sound was gruesome, like nails dragging through damp clay. I fumbled for the call button clipped to my pillow, my fingers suddenly clumsy and slick with sweat. Should I call a nurse? What would I say? That my elderly roommate was scratching the wallpaper? It sounded like dementia, a sad symptom of a worn-out mind. But as I watched, a cold dread, deeper than any pain from my leg, began to seep into me. This wasn't delirium. This was purpose. He was carving something into the plaster. A word. As he shifted slightly, a sliver of moonlight illuminated his work. I could just make out the letters. Eliza. Just as I read the name, the scraping stopped. The silence rushed back in, now 1,000 times more menacing. Slowly, with a creak of old joints that seemed to echo in the stillness, Mr. Harrison began to turn. What I saw wasn't the frail old man from the bed. His face, illuminated in the pale light, was twisted. His mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, the kind you see on a ventriloquist's dummy, all teeth and shadowed gums. But his eyes were the worst part. They weren't the clouded, milky eyes of an old man. They were black, bottomless pools of utter malevolence. And they were fixed directly on me. He raised a long, bony finger, the nail ragged and dark with plaster dust, and pointed it straight at my chest. A whisper, dry and rasping like dead leaves skittering across pavement, slithered across the room. "You're next." I slammed my fist on the call button, hitting it again and again. A primal scream caught in my throat. The world dissolved into a pinprick of terror focused on that grinning face. The door burst open, flooding the room with the harsh light of the hallway. A stout, no-nonsense nurse bustled in. "What's all the racket?" she demanded, her voice a comforting anchor of normalcy. I could only point with a trembling hand toward the corner. "Him," I choked out. "Mr. Harrison." The nurse followed my gaze, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. The corner was empty. She walked over to the other bed, pulling the curtain back fully. There, lying peacefully on his back, eyes closed and breathing that same shallow rattle, was Mr. Harrison. He looked exactly as he had for the past 2 days. Frail, harmless, asleep. The nurse gave me a look that was part pity, part suspicion. Bad dream, honey. The painkillers can do that to you. She checked the wall, running a hand over the smooth, unmarked surface. See? Nothing there. They moved me to a private room the next morning after I refused to spend another minute in that one, my hysterical pleas written off as a reaction to medication. 2 days later, I was discharged. As a young orderly wheeled me toward the exit, we passed my old room. The door was open, and a cleaning crew was inside, stripping the bed. I overheard one cleaner say to another, "Poor old Mr. Harrison. It's a shame, to die all alone like that." The other one nodded. "Yeah. It's creepy, though. He's been gone for over a week, but the night staff keeps swearing they hear noises coming from this room." A chill colder than any winter wind snaked its way into my soul. I asked the orderly to stop. I looked into the empty room, my eyes drawn to the corner by the window. There, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, were faint, shallow scratches in the plaster. I could still make out the name. Eliza. And just below it, the fresh, barely there beginnings of another letter. It looked like a J. My name is Jacob. Story 2. I still hear the low hum of the ventilation system, a constant metallic sigh that never quite stops. It was the night I spent in the intensive care unit of St. Bartholomew's, a name I'd heard whispered in the corridors of the city's older neighborhoods, a hospital that once boasted state-of-the-art equipment and a reputation for saving lives. I was a third-year nursing student, assigned to shadow a senior nurse for the night shift, eager to prove I could handle the real world beyond classroom simulations. I didn't know that the real world could swallow you whole. The first hour was routine. I checked vitals, noted the alarms, and watched as patients' monitors flickered with the same banal rhythm. Beep, 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 a heart thudding in a plastic cradle. The night was quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustle of a sheet or a distant cough. At 2:13 a.m., the intercom crackled with a voice that sounded too far away. "Code Blue, Room 12B. The lights above the hallway flickered, briefly casting the sterile white tiles into a strobe of red. Room 12B was a small cubicle, the door half open, a thin line of fluorescent light spilling out. Inside, a middle-aged man lay, his eyes open but unseeing. The monitor next to him was flatlining. The green line was a dead flat line. I'd been told we'd have to move the body to the morgue, but the senior nurse, Nurse Ramirez, said we were waiting for the doctor. Her voice, usually warm, carried an edge of unease she tried to hide. I stepped closer, the smell of antiseptic mingling with something deeper, a sour rot that seemed to seep from the very walls. The man's mouth was open, a grotesque grin frozen in place, as if he'd caught a secret too terrible to speak. And then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes began to move. Not a blink, not a dart, but a slow, deliberate sweep across the room. I felt my skin tighten. Something about the way his eyelids fluttered didn't match the rhythm of a dead man. It was too alive. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus on the monitors. The flatline was just that. Flat. Yet the man's gaze locked onto me, and a low, guttural sound seemed to emanate from his throat, more a vibration than a voice. I couldn't quite register the words, but the tone was unmistakably pleading. "Don't leave." I jerked back, and the door slammed shut, startling the other nurses down the hall. "What's happening?" asked a junior nurse, her eyes wide behind her goggles. Ramirez, her face ashen, whispered, "We need to get out. Now." The hallway lights flickered again, this time in a rhythm that matched the beeping of the monitors. Rapid, frantic. Then a sudden deathly silence. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out any rational thought. I grabbed my bag, my hands shaking, and headed for the exit. But the doors to the west wing, our usual escape, were locked tight. A sign above read, "Authorized personnel only." I could see my reflection in the polished glass. A pale face, eyes rimmed with dark circles, a thin sheen of sweat glossing my forehead. We ran. The corridors stretched, elongated in the harsh fluorescent glare, each turn revealing identical rooms, each room containing a patient in a similar state. Monitors dead, eyes open, mouths twisted in silent screams. I could swear I heard faint whispers, like a choir of dying voices murmuring in a language that resonated with the bone. The air grew colder, and the smell of decay intensified, as if the building itself were rotting from the inside out. Finally, we burst through a service door into the staff lounge. The lights were off. The only illumination came from a flickering emergency bulb. The room was empty, save for a single chair facing the wall. On the wall, scrawled in a trembling crimson ink, were words that made my stomach churn. They never left. A sudden crash behind us made us all spin. The door to the lounge swung open, and a figure staggered in. Pale, gaunt, eyes hollow. It was the man from room 12B, his body inexplicably whole, his limbs moving with a jerky, puppet-like fluidity. He raised a hand, and the air seemed to shudder. The emergency bulb sputtered, casting his shadow across the wall, a monstrous silhouette with elongated fingers that scraped the plaster. "Don't. Follow." The whisper rose, this time unmistakably audible, reverberating in the concrete. I could feel the words like cold fingers pulling at my throat. The figure moved closer, each step accompanied by a low, resonant tone, a thrum that seemed to sync with the building's ventilation system, turning it into a mournful organ. The sound grew louder, and the walls began to breathe, expanding and contracting as though drawing an unseen breath. Nurse Ramirez, who had always been the pillar of composure, collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. Her eyes widened in terror as she whispered, "It's in the walls." It never died. The figure reached out, its fingers brushing the wall, and a ripple of black, viscous fluid seeped from the cracks, oozing like black blood across the tiled floor. I wanted to run, to scream, to call for help, but my legs were rooted, as if the floor itself had become a quagmire pulling me down. The air grew thick. I could taste metal on my tongue. The figure's smile widened, more grotesque than before, teeth jagged like broken glass. It leaned close, and I could see its eyes, an abyss of darkness, pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. "Don't be afraid," it hissed. The voice was both a promise and a threat. The last thing I recall is the sound of my own heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to echo through the corridors of the hospital, merging with the perpetual hum of the ventilation. Then, everything went white. I woke in my own bed, the morning sun sneaking through the curtains, the world outside ordinary and bright. I was alone, my body aching, but alive. The hospital's name on my phone's call log still read St. Bartholomew's. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, a fevered hallucination brought on by fatigue. Yet the scar on my palm, shaped like a tiny crescent, remained, a souvenir I could not explain. Later, when I returned to the campus library to research the hospital's history, I found a single article dated back to 1974. St. Bartholomew's ICU, collapse, a tragic fire claiming 19 lives. The report detailed how a ventilation system failure had caused a fire that consumed the ICU, killing everyone inside. The building was shuttered, never rebuilt. The article ended with a chilling note. Locals say the souls of those who perished still wander the hallways, pleading for release. I never went back to that hospital. But at night, when the wind rattles the shutters, I sometimes hear a low metallic hum, and a whisper, barely audible, carries through the darkness. "Don't leave."